On this too, I wanted to ask you a question. Did you happen to read that letter that I think it was the cardinal or the bishop wrote, and I sent it to you? Did you happen to read that?
Yeah, I wanted to get your opinion on that. What did you think?
Me personally, wow, I can't believe you asked me first. I was hoping to ask you first, but since you jumped in and you beat me to it, I'll give you my best chance at it. I thought it was a really well written version of what I kind of just said and what I feel I believe. And I really believe that we're at this. And for anybody that hasn't read it, I would Google it right away. And it was a letter that was written on or about the middle of June 2020. From, was it Pastor Bob? Was it the bishop? I don't remember the name.
It was the bishop, yeah.
It was the bishop it was a letter he wrote to President Trump, wherein, I'm going to paraphrase the best I can. Maybe you can help me out, but basically said, what we're seeing is good versus evil. And we're seeing a lot of evil rising up right now. And in this particular case, he doesn't say this. This is my take on it. But I think a lot of the evil, quote unquote, evil is ignorance. And that's why I think, God, Jesus, and anything that goes along godliness tends to be referred to as light. And you tend to hear light and darkness, which, by the way, the new seating position that you chose with that light right over your head makes you look extremely angelic. Yeah, it's like streaming from the heavens through you to us. Anyhow, that's all. I'm done.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, with this light bouncing off my bald head, I will try. What I really appreciate about the bishop's letter is that he found a very simple way, an uncomplicated way, but I also feel like it's a very uncompromising way to say we are facing a big moment in our nation's history. We are facing a bigger narrative than just little individual instances. We're facing wave after wave of good versus evil. And he calls upon the president to act accordingly. And I think it's a very powerful and very profound letter.
Another thing to what you just said that I heard out of that letter was also, it sounded to me like he was saying, it's a pivotal moment here, and we have really the chance to lay the groundwork for how the whole world is going to evolve because of this. And I think that speaks to the greatness of our country, the fact that no matter what negative things you want to say about our country, and by all means, no, we're not all perfect. The country is definitely not perfect, but it is still looked at by the majority of people around the world as a leader in human rights in general, of all different kinds and ways. So I think, that letter, when I read that part of that letter, also spoke to saying, we're pretty excited to see what you come up with here, because if it works, could really be a roadmap for the world to come together.
Yeah.
In a positive way, because you hear all the, the one world government and the, we're trying to get listen, all that stuff societally, is going to be like in effect, a virus, if you will, of a deeper set problem. So if we lay the groundwork properly now, the world is going to listen, and America is going to lead it into whatever this next phase of us are. But I really think that the way to get there, which is not being considered enough or not being discussed or talked about enough, and I think it needs to be, which is why we're doing this, is truly to seek the word of the Lord.
Yes.
And take some time to talk with your pastor or your religious leader, whatever it is. If you don't believe, you don't have to believe Jesus is your Savior. You don't have to believe He's your God, but you should read the stories, because there's a really good roadmap in there that we should all, just being human, should take note of. There's a lot of good things to take out of his life and the stories as they're told in the Bible. And I think having that conversation and getting right with God first should be everybody's first step that really, really, truly is there for change, and not just for some kind of a short-term payoff, which might be a motivation of some people who have attached themselves on to making comments or commentary or agitating in any way what the true focus should be, and that is this is our chance to connect with God. Yep. And you can say this is a rapture moment, or this is the coming of Christ. You're hearing it all. We're hearing it all. 36 species of aliens are finally going to show up and tell us that they were created by God too.
Right. Yeah.
which could happen. And if it does, I think that's even, if it does, I think that's even more reason than we should be right with our God beforehand, so that we can actually endure whatever comes next.
Yeah, however big it's going to be. Yeah, no, I think following the example of Jesus is mighty and profound. You and I have talked before about John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery. Here are these guys who...
You got to tell the story again, because it didn't record. Remember, we lost that when you told it. So tell it again if you want.
So in John chapter 8, Jesus is having a debate in John chapter 7 and the rest of 8 with these people who are just not getting what his mission is all about. And they're all about doing everything correctly, and he is about doing things correctly according to their own eyes. And he's about doing things according to God's plan, God's way. And so the conflict that he's having in chapter 7, later on in 8, maybe even in 9, is illustrated by one episode. And it's this woman who's caught in the act of adultery. So these guys drag this woman before Jesus, and they throw her down, and they say, here we found a woman who's caught in the very act of adultery. According to the law, Moses says that such a woman should be stoned to death. It has nothing to do with cannabis. It has everything to do with public execution, right? And so, and then they're putting it to Jesus. They're testing Jesus. They're saying, so what do you say? Because they want to try and show everybody around them how right they are, and how Jesus is not going to do the right thing, because what they're suspicious of is that Jesus is not going to publicly execute her. Or if he does, they're going to use that to their advantage. And so here's what Jesus does. First, the weird part of the story is that they actually caught her in the act of adultery, and then they're bringing her before Jesus to stone her to death. I don't know how it is they found out, but that's not something that you just kind of stumble on, right? The story seems a little cooked. And
like it was a setup.
Yeah, totally a setup. At least for Jesus. I don't know how much else the setup was, but it's kind of a fishy way to approach Jesus. Here's what Jesus does. They're all raring to go. They're picking up their heavy stones. She's on the dirt. Jesus goes down to the ground, and he starts to draw on the dirt. We don't know what he was drawing. Maybe he was playing hangman. I don't know whatever he was doing. But he starts to draw on the dirt, clearly ignoring them. And then they insist again that he pontificate, that he judged the situation. And so Jesus stands up and he looks at them and he says, whichever one of you is without sin, you can go ahead and cast the first stone. It was profound. Honestly, the only person without sin in that entire situation was Jesus himself. And it hit him. It hit those men right between the eyes. And it says they went away from the oldest to the youngest. They just couldn't do it. They lost their stomach for the setup. They realized that they were in the wrong. They were ashamed because they knew that they were all sinners too. And when they had all gone and the dust had settled, Jesus looks down at this woman and she says, where are the people that are accusing you? And she says, there's nobody here accusing me. And he says, then neither do I condemn you. And so Jesus practices forgiveness in that moment, which is profound. I think this is instructive to the third thing that can happen. If you go to the people that are protesting, if you go to the people who are in conflict and you listen to their story, even if you go to the people who are trying to help the people who are protesting, either the police or whatever, go and listen to their story. Repent. Use that as an opportunity to understand their perspective and their perspective as their truth, and to sit out of judgment of them, which is very easy to do because we love being right? And so repent and make an invitation to pray so that you can be talking to the right person. The thing is to stay with the people who are hurt. Stay with them, like Jesus did with the woman. He didn't just give a quick answer and then run away. He hung in there with them. He stayed with her in that moment, and that became very powerful and transformational for her life. That forgiveness changed the entire course of her life. I don't know what she did after that moment because she's an anonymous person. But I think that's why the Bible leaves her anonymous, is so that way we can put our story in there as well. Not saying that we're adulterers, but the Bible often leaves, or Eastern literature, ancient Eastern literature, often leaves certain ambiguities. And the reason why it does that is so that you can put yourself into the story. Listen, I may not be an adulterer, but I know what it's like to be caught for doing wrong.
Right.
And what am I to do in that moment? Well, I'm to be at the feet of Jesus and to not listen to the haters and the people that are trying to escalate the situation and to be judgmental. I'm just to listen to what Jesus says. And what is the word that Jesus will give in that moment? But forgiveness. And so, for instance.
Well, let me, before you dig in any deeper, I want to make sure that I'm following you here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think some of this builds off of some of the stuff we talked in a previous session, but didn't get recorded, which you were telling me about people's pain coming from a place of fear and loss. And I hear you saying here, what do we do in a period where we do not know what to do? And what I'm hearing you say is, well, what you need to be doing first to start the process off is forgive. And so in that real, just quickly, a point there that I have a question on is, does the forgiveness start with us? Are we forgiving ourselves? Are we supposed to be forgiving others? Are we supposed to be doing it all at once? And then how do we ask for forgiveness? How do we attain that forgiveness? I'm confused as to how does that work, especially with people that are maybe having some, emotionally, very, emotionally charged times right now. How do we go back to get that peace, and how do we start asking for that through forgiveness? Explain that, because I think that that's a great part for a lot of people.
So I'm going to use Facebook as an example because I'm not on it at the moment. And so I feel like I'm far enough away from it that I can talk about it. Say you lose your mind on Facebook. You do like a full keyboard warrior rant, and like you're letting the world know that you're right and everybody else can go suck eggs or whatever it is that they need to do, right? And so you lose your mind and you end up losing some friends because of that. And you gave your opinions and it got a little ugly. Say it got a little ugly. What is forgiveness in that moment? It's you realizing first that God would never talk that way to you. God would never talk like that. How do I know? Because I know Jesus' stories. I know that he's not the kind of guy who picks up a stone and throws it. I know he's not the kind of guy to rub her nose in it. I know he's the kind of guy who would remain calm in that moment and remain kind in that moment. Maybe speak
and
some
that's
truth.
what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be emulating that. So these things that you're saying right now, you're saying this is to say, here are a few ways that we can start enact it, which is, do not give in to your first inclination. Do not go with that first, gut feeling that might be, a negative. Am I following you here? Am I tracking?
You're totally tracking.
Okay, keep me going.
And I'm also saying that this is for an instance where the bad had happened. So how do you get forgiveness in that moment? Is first to realize that it's something that first comes from God. If you're not forgiven by God, you won't even know how to forgive another person, right? So first you need to understand God would never treat you that way, and that God hasn't treated you that way, that God has loved you unconditionally. You were the woman caught in adultery. You're the person who lost it on Facebook. And what he says to you is, I don't condemn you. I'm not going to hold this against you. I forgive you. Once you realize the enormity of that, once you realize the enormity of God's forgiveness, it actually enables you to go out and seek forgiveness from other people. And so when you're put in the proper frame and you realize God didn't Facebook rant on me, God didn't judge me, he didn't throw a stone at me, he didn't rub my nose in it, he totally forgave me, and I acted a fool, then you can go back to those people that were offended. Maybe even go back on your social media post and say, I just want you to know I'm really sorry. I got caught up in a moment. I'm very emotional about this. I didn't mean to be, and then you could just list out whatever you need to say that's heartfelt, without making excuses for yourself, which is hard to do.
But see, Pastor Bob, I think that that's a very difficult thing for a lot of people to do, because what you're saying is you have to be real with yourself, and you have to
Yeah.
be able to accept that you aren't perfect, and that you made a mistake, and you have to be feeling sorry about that, and,
Yep.
and you need to be able to be comfortable and secure enough in yourself to and vulnerable enough in yourself to be able to admit it, and to yourself first, and
Yep.
then to others. And so, and again, I think that this could be a very tough point for people as a starting point, because it's a lot easier said than done.
Oh yeah.
And this kind of then goes to something else that we've spoken of in other videos, and I'm sure we'll speak of them again. How then, do we tap into that kind of strength that it takes to be able to even reach that point in ourselves where we can say, yeah, you know what, I'm not proud of the way that I acted before, but I am human, and I do now realize that it wasn't right. So I'm going to vow to myself to make a difference. And then, like you said a little bit earlier, and I don't know if it's going to be in this video or if it's going to be, if we're going to cut it and make it 2 videos, but a previous video or a future video that we'll say made reference to then, asking God to change us.
Yep.
And that is done through the power of prayer. Am I correct there? So we need to be praying more, and we need to be encouraging others. And like you said in the story, do not leave that person. You want to stay with the person that needs it. And I think the way that we can do that is by praying with others and for others. I don't know. Am I close here?
No, I think you're right on. And I think the only way you can leap that impossible gap, because you're talking about how difficult it would be to have a very honest moment like that. I think the only way to be able to begin to leap that gap is to understand how much you've been forgiven by God. That's being at the feet of Jesus. I mean, what else could the woman caught in adultery say but thank you? So once you realize, once you're aware of how much God has forgiven you, it's the first step to leaping across that gap of being able to say to other people, there was a moment when I was in real big trouble, and here's what God did for me. Let me tell you how it affected my life. And that's what I want to do right now. I really messed up here, and I don't want to lose our relationship because of that. I'm willing to put down my stone. I'm willing to stay out of judgment. And I just want to be in a different position than I was before. And so you can apologize to people that way. And this goes to loss and fear and hurt, and the mushroom is what I call it. A really important step in analyzing a situation and kind of de-escalating the situation where you're in judgment and where you're kind of messing up a lot, is to realize where bad decisions come from. And I like to use the example of a mushroom. It could either be a mushroom in the forest, if you like that kind of thing. But if that brings back memories of the 1960s, then you could think of a mushroom cloud. That's fine. All right. So people make really big, sometimes irreversible decisions because they're starting in a place of loss, and that's the ground that this mushroom starts at. Loss is where people's protest comes from. It's where their anger comes from. It's where their unreasonableness comes from. It's where their tears come from. It's where their depression comes from. It all comes from a sense of loss. I'm not talking about just one type of loss. I'm talking about any sense of loss. This is where those big reactions come from. Now, what ends up happening is from loss, there's 2 things, and they form kind of the stem of the reaction. There is fear on one side and hurt on the other. So from loss comes fear and hurt. Now, the longer the fear and the hurt, the bigger the mushroom's going to be. All right? So the longer that you're in a state of fear and hurt, the larger your reaction is going to be. Now, the mushroom, the head of the mushroom.
You're talking about like the mushroom cloud. So the longer the fear and the hurt, it's going to be a bigger. Okay.
It's going to be bigger. It's going to have a larger explosion, larger result. And the explosion, if you have fear and hurt, the explosion is going to be depression. The explosion is going to be anger, like active anger, not just, a frowny face. And so the more fear and hurt that you experience, the larger the big reaction. The only way to then analyze why you're having such a big reaction, because you may click send before you think about what you did, right? And then you may even look back, and though you feel like what you said was honest and maybe even right, you might say, but I went a little too far there. If you want to know why you did that, it's because it came from a place of fear and hurt. And so you have to get in touch with yourself in the places where your fear and your hurt exist. If you want to change the reaction, you have to say, what am I afraid of? What caused me hurt here? And you have to be able to name it and identify it. When you're in attack mode against another person, say it's anger, you have to be able to figure out what their fear and their hurt is if you don't want to be affected by their reaction, right? And so you have to get in touch with what they're afraid or what they're hurt by in order to get past their anger, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so this is really the practical steps to kind of learning to be kind and human, is to realize.
Well, it's funny that you're having to break it down, and I think that's a really good thing. I think that a lot of people don't understand that I've heard this a lot, and I kind of like it. It's becoming a catchphrase around, especially younger generations, but they say, be the change you want to see.
Yeah.
It kind of fits in a little bit here. Is that who it is? It was Michael Jackson that said that? Be the change you want to see. Oh, from the song, the lyrics. Yeah, I think that's, but what we have to realize in that statement is that it starts with us. And, we need to take that conscious step to find our God. I think we need to be coming in touch with our God and coming in touch with. So again, if you're watching this and you're not Christian, but you have at least don't be following a violent God. There's a lot of violent gods out there that, are telling people to go out and kill and do these things that most of the other religions say you shouldn't be doing, and you're not here for that because it's not your choice. You don't get to take somebody else's wife. I get to choose those things. You don't get to take somebody out of this world. I get to do that. That's my deal. So don't lie to me, and don't lie to yourself, and don't lie to others, right? And this litany of other things that kind of all fall under the same umbrella here. But I think this is a good time to take to go out and get right with yourself first. And Pastor Bob's done a great job today, and we're going to continue to do this in the future of finding new and practical applications for how to overcome these challenges, which truly start with us. And you can't you cannot solve the problem by putting on somebody else. The only way to solve the problem is to start making that commitment yourself. So if you're going to, like Pastor Bob used it a couple of times, examples of you're going to click send on your emotional tirade. Be prepared first then to address those things in yourself. Yeah. And if you don't have the strength or the ability, which many of us do not, and it's quite apparent through what's going on, many humans simply do not in this world right now. So we're here to say the first thing to do is to try to find that peace and harmony in yourself first. And if you can't do it on your own, then talk to your religious leader, talk to your pastors, talk to your priests, talk to your shamans or whoever they are, and try to get a plan for yourself. But I'm going to tell you, I think a really good plan is to read some of the stories of Jesus and see how he was doing things back in a time that was very similar to ours. In fact, I actually think the biblical times are probably much worse than ours for a number of different reasons. Mm-hmm. So I really think that we should be starting with that. And if you can't do it and you want to make, or you want to do it, but you just don't know how to do it, the first step is forgiveness of yourself. And to do that, you must pray. You need to pray. We all need to pray. You said it earlier in one of the other videos. You said, you had these mass shootings that were followed by, huge prayer sessions. So it just goes to show people need to pray more and get yourself right with God.
Here's an example of fear and hurt coming from loss and the expectation of a really big reaction. For years, I've been telling my daughters not to play ball in the house. And they don't play like softball. They're overhand throwing, they're kicking it, they're completely savage. And so for years and years, I've been saying, don't play ball in the house, you're going to break something. But it's kind of rough because my wife likes to play ball in the house with them. And so it's like a dual parenting moment where I'm just sitting back and so they all expect me. I'm like the grumpy man who's like, turn off the light, and so don't play ball in the house. Well, the other day, my kids were obviously playing, and then it got really quiet, and my wife walked by my study and gave me this look like, and I was like, what's going on? She's like, I'll tell you in a second. Well, I wasn't waiting a second. It looked weird, right? So I walk out, and I notice that they're all gathered around the TV. My 6-year-old begins weeping because she says, we broke the TV. I'm so sorry, right?
Oh, man.
Now, they're experiencing a large sense of loss. The TV is, there's like Jesus Christ, our family, hockey, the television. I mean, so this is top 5 of important things in our house. I didn't even say our fish. Our fish is like 12, And so they're experiencing a big sense of loss. And the TV is literally broken.
And fear, because they're wondering what's about to happen.
And so they're experiencing this huge loss. Amy Jo is hurt. She's very hurt, and she knows it's her fault together with her sisters. Her other sisters are experiencing fear. Even my wife is a little afraid. Why? Because I have warned this about them for years. They're expecting, I told you so. They're expecting me to blow my stack. They're expecting it. And like one of my daughters is actually getting a little bit of an attitude, and that's just her fear. That's just her fear coming out in that way. So we have loss, we have fear, and we have hurt. And they're expecting kaboom. And I look at them and I look at the television and I say, that's okay, let's just go get another television. And they were completely flabbergasted. And my one with the attitude, she starts giving me a little bit of attitude. And I was like, no, it's okay. And Amy's like weeping and holding the television against her, like the Pieta or something like that, right? And my wife is just quiet. And my other daughter starts to get tears in her eyes. I said, no. I said, don't worry about it. I said, because this is just stuff. And stuff will get broken. And stuff will get lost. And stuff will go away. But I don't think it's worth sacrificing how you guys feel about me as a father towards you in order to take care of stuff. Stuff will come and go. But this, our family, will always be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what a great reaction in such a profound moment for you.
Well, it wasn't very easy for me to do.
Family. Well, that's why I was saying it certainly couldn't have been easy to do, but through your power and your commitment to making a conscious decision to specifically not react to that first guttural desire to explode and to let loose with your emotions and create an emotional reaction, you ended up creating a bonding moment for you in a point where there could have been adversity.
You see, grace in that moment removed the fear of judgment, the fear of law, and I care about my kids and my wife more than I care about the TV. If I would have reacted that big, it would have proven to them that I care more about a television than I care about how they feel about me and how I feel about them.
What a great comment.
I was literally in the spot where I could have been like Jeffrey Rush and Les Mis, and been like, I knew it, and I could have really let him have it. And you know what? I would have felt right. And to a degree, I would have been well within my rights to really let him have it. But you see, there's sometimes you can be exactly right and dead wrong at the same time. And so this is one of those moments.
Just kidding.
That's an example of you have a big sense of loss, there's fear and there's hurt, and you're expecting. And so how you de-escalate it is, I saw the hurt in them. I saw the fear in them. I knew what the loss was. And I said, not willing. I'm not willing to go kabloom on this.
Well, the possibility of that is because of your connection with God, and that's a great example of what you can have in the moment. And if you take that example of what you just said there, and then you take that out of that context and you move it over and you drop it into another context, the result is the same. And depending on where you apply it, could be have a much larger impact too.
To be perfectly honest, that reaction didn't come because I'm smart or I'm clever or I went to school and learned this. It didn't come from any of that at all. Literally, the source for why I was able to choose to do differently in that moment is because I have literally been in that moment with God, where I have broken my life, and He's warned me by His word about a bazillion times, and I've been afraid of God. I know I've hurt God, and I'm afraid to be hurt by God for justification for my wrongs. And what He did for me is He forgave me. And if He can do that for me, and I'm aware of that, then I can slow my roll on the Bob train, when it's coming to town. Does that make sense?
It does, and it speaks of how then that passed through you to your family.
That's right. You modeled
God. And so in that regard, then, it makes it, I'm going to try to use the right words, I'm not this articulate when it comes to this kind of stuff, but, we're supposed to be treating others kindly, acting in ways of Jesus, and be able to emulate that. And that's what really happened in that moment then, was you were able to truly emulate for your family what it feels like to forgive.
Yeah.
And then allowing them to feel what it feels like to be forgiven.
Yeah.
So in that, you were facilitating that as God does for us.
And we got a new TV.
As the Father. And you got a new TV. Nice. Nothing wrong with that.